Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott, and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Garrett. In this week's episode, we continue to not do part 2 of Apostles and Apostates.
I think that's what the listeners cry out for.
Yeah, it is.
They cry out for us to not actually do anything we say we're going to do.
We were talking about something really interesting. You were going somewhere with it, and now you're 3 weeks in a row not talking about it. You're right. We start off with a listener email. Dear sirs, this comes to us all the way from the
Frozen
Great North. The Frozen North.
The Great North.
And this comes to us from a previous emailer that didn't have a question before, but suffered a serious blow to the head as he fell on ice in what I can only assume was middle of July.
Yeah, it was probably August 1st, and it was an ice storm.
So
Canada.
he has come back with a question, and we felt we assumed that Carl does not have much time with us, and so we want to get right to his question. So this is what
not much time with us because
he's going to die because of internal bleeding
because of his accident,
because of his head injury. So we wanted to get right to it. We'll return to not talking about apostles and apostates next week. Dear sirs, I am addressing you thusly. By the way, so there are a lot of yous that are in places that shouldn't have yous, as he is trying to use the King's English.
He's using the proper King's English, which if you've ever seen, a British person write the word color,
yeah,
there's like just a U just in there.
Yes.
The Americans, we shorten it down.
Yeah, look, we got things happening here, Carl. We don't have time for all your U's.
Throw another U in there.
Dear sirs, I am addressing you thusly, as I am never quite sure of your current designations. Well, first of all, Carl, the dissertation is going slowly. Doctor, professor, associate professor, plus being an overly polite Canadian, I don't want to use the dick me at line twice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was for me.
Last we spoke, I was enjoying our chilly 10 months of winter, lying on my back in the middle of a 4-lane thoroughfare with several U's there, enjoying a blurred vision of the heavens. You will be pleased to note that we are currently snow-free in Alberta, as we are enjoying our 10 days of summer while squeezing in the famed Calgary Stampede. By the way, Carl, my goal is, my wife is, we grew up in rural Idaho. She wants to go to the Calgary Stampede more than anything, and so we're going to go there. If not next summer, the following summer, going up to the Calgary Stampede. We'll hit a Canadian Tire outside of Edmonton in a town called Leduc, buy some roughneck jerseys.
Some of your descendants.
Leduc Roughnecks is the hockey organization there outside of Edmonton.
What level of minor league is this?
Well,
how many A's?
It's their no. So it's kind of their hockey system there. So you have juniors and you have kids.
So when kids are born in Canada, they're immediately put on a hockey team,
absolutely,
semi-pro hockey team,
100%. Before their mother hugs them, they slide them out on the ice.
Right, so it's like getting on the list for Packer tickets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like, my grandson was just born. I put his name on the list.
100%. Anyway, so we'll hit up that Canadian Tire, buy some Leduc Roughneck gear just outside of Edmonton. I know that they're a bitter rival to you.
I believe I said last time I've driven to Calgary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's a very long drive.
It is.
Yeah.
It's about 12 hours or so from here.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
This time of year?
Do you think Rex's Elders Quorum president is listening at this point?
No, we're going to let Rex's Elders Quorum president know when he should start listening.
We should probably find out what his name is. Rex's Elders Quorum president.
It's like Rachel's mom.
We need you to email us and tell us who you are. You know what? I don't even think Rex is active. He doesn't even have an Elders Quorum president. He's not listening. I feel like Rex has been lying to us for years.
I don't know though. It sounded so believable that someone would listen to this, think it's just silly and ridiculous, and then half hour in, you get to some good stuff. So I think it's pretty on point.
Except for the getting to good stuff part, I think it is pretty on point.
It's true. Alas, I digress, which is funny. He said that as we also digressed.
Yeah. We can only get 10 minutes in before
my communication today is to actually forward a query. If you remember the last time, I did not have a question, only advice to post warnings of northern climates for northern climates. I believe that you are gaining traction north of Polk's 5440 or fight.
Wow, that is an epic drop for this podcast.
That is very, very.
Yeah, there are like
very,
four
very,
of our listeners who got that, and me. So 5 of us.
That's very funny. Here is a little background to frame the question. While studying Come Follow Me for the coming week. By the way, all of the extra U's he
this letter would have only been like probably
I'd be done reading
seconds,
it by now.
But there's just U's
There's
everywhere.
Just so many U's.
Probably a couple A's that he didn't mean to throw in.
For the coming week, I came across a scripture in Acts 9:6. The Savior asks Saul, Savior misspelled, with extra U's, "Why persecutest thou me?" After recovering from astonishment, Saul responds with, "What will thou have me do?" An awesome question we should probably all contemplate. Good point, Carl. This reminded me of something in church history that I have heard a few times, but have never been able to track down. Apparently, Joseph Smith once dressed down Brigham Young publicly for something that he did not do. Brigham's humble response was, quote, "Joseph, what will you have me do?" So, is there a documented occurrence of this, or will you yet again crush the soul out of all Brigham Young's descendants who like to relate this incident in their quest for filthy lucre? Or in your quest for filthy lucre.
In my quest,
yes.
Yeah.
Not Brigham Young's quest.
They aren't going for filthy lucre. We are. Carl, are you a premium subscriber? If you aren't, we're not answering this.
Knowing of your joint, that's with a question mark, sleuthing abilities, I leave this query in your capable hands. Sorry for interrupting your podcast, Carl. P.S. I could not finish this correspondence without apologizing at least once as a polite Canadian.
Very good. You're
PPS,
representing your nation well.
Very, very well. I should like to hear something from the Hugh Finley mailbag, Finally mailbag, as he was the first postmaster of Quebec, 1765. I am positive our distant friend from Quebec would appreciate it, because me reading this email comes to you from the Phoebe Draper mailbag. Right.
So I'm going to have to take issue, first of all.
Okay.
Right. I mean, 1765. There might be some of your, I don't know, French Canadian fellow citizens.
Yes, Joseph Leduc is now in Canada for almost 30 years,
but still only owns 1 acre. So you tell me what he's doing.
Well, he was there for 30 years, never sent a letter.
I feel like Joseph Leduc is he's not really expanding the talents that he's been given.
Well, yeah, he hit him under a bushel. The master was he knew that he'd be angry and that he would take it out.
He reaped where he did not sow.
That's what I was looking for. Reaped where he did not sow.
So the reason why I have to call you out on that is because I'm sitting next to a descendant of a French Canadian. And as all French Canadians know, Hugh Finley's not the first postmaster of Quebec.
That's a weird way to spell a French name, Hugh Finley.
Because he's the first postmaster of Quebec after the British conquer it.
Yes, after the Treaty of Paris, he's the first postmaster.
Which Treaty of Paris was that? Because there's lots of them.
There's
lots. Yeah,
yes.
1763. But
that was the worst flex I've ever seen in my life. Which Treaty of Paris?
You can get more of that from the premium content. We have to give the people what they want. They want postmasters. They want 5440 or fight.
They want to know which Treaty of Paris it was. Right.
If I hadn't said that, the emails we would have received would have been legion. It would have been legion. But I want to quickly just call out for a second that, there are, of course, French people there prior to the English taking it over. It's pretty caustic, the end of that Civil War. But, really historians think the first, postmaster, if you want to call him that, is actually a Portuguese settler in Quebec named Pedro, but I think goes by Pierre de Silva because he's trying to go along to get along.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Pedro, you mean Pierre?
Yeah,
I can see him doing it with like a Missouri accent. You mean Pierre?
Yeah. You don't mean Pierre, right? Yeah, Pierre. Yeah. I think that's about right. I love how in Latter-day Saint movies, whenever we want to make someone evil, we give them a Missouri accent.
Yeah.
Even if they're not, we could be in California, and we want the person to be evil. Give them a Missouri accent.
Hey guys, I'm here with some letters. What's your name? Pedro. Oh, I don't know any Pedros.
No Pedro's bringing letters around here. What's your name again? It's Pierre. That's what I thought you said. In 1693, he is actually given the contract to transport letters from Quebec and Montreal.
Oh, how about that?
And then the colony's first actual, he's the first postmaster by that, but it's a French postmaster. In fact, Canada issued a commemorative stamp honoring Pedro de Silva in 2003. Did it? Do we have any philatelists listening?
Yes, we do. I believe that our good friend Reed is a
philatelist.
I believe so. No, it's coins.
Oh, okay.
I get stamps and coins off.
I thought you would confuse philatelist with philanderer, and I was a little worried that we'd get another email from
not Reed.
Yeah, not Reed. He's going to pass away in 1717, and you'll get a true French name.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
too soon.
Yeah, Jean Morin becomes Jean Morin, or Jean Morin becomes the new postmaster. Of course, until the British take things over. So I mean, you have to. If I were a French Canadian or sitting next to a descendant of a French Canadian,
well, Carl's living in the province of Alberta. I'm pretty sure that he's not counting the French either.
So how much, is he happy that every road?
Well, he's still resenting the fact that he got probably like a B- in French. In middle school he just hated it, but he had to take it anyway, and he's just irritated.
Well, look, what we're going for is we know our only growth area is Canadian listeners.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah.
But we think our growth area is French Canadian listeners. That's the money ball. That's what we're trying to do.
We've seen a lot of pickup in Spain as my son talks to other missionaries and they're listening, but instead of, because they can't listen to the podcast, so he's just sharing the Google Drive file with the which doesn't count. But we do have 181 downloads in Spain, so it's blowing up.
That has to be just missionaries who are illegally downloading it, right?
100%.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad to know that we're helping the cause. Anyway, just thought we'd point that out.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the question. Now, this is a really good question. In fact, I've been asked this question multiple times, just in passing. People say, "Hey, do you know where that quote is that where Brigham Young had this? He was dressed down by Joseph Smith."
13 minutes in, Rex is Elders Quorum president. Go ahead and start there.
Well, I mean, wouldn't he have to listen to this point?
I'm going to put it in the description.
We can't just call it out every time, or people will just always skip past the first 13 minutes.
That's fine. It counts as a download.
Richard's always thinking about numbers. This is a really great story, right? And part of the reason why I think it is so, it has so much, it has legs, so to speak. The reason why you've heard it before is we love how devoted Brigham Young is to Joseph Smith. And in fact, I mean, if I had to, I've been working on annotating and publishing Brigham Young's journals up through the Nauvoo period with the Brigham Young Center Foundation. Those are going to be coming out in a few months, actually, where we took them like we did with the Joseph Smith papers, and we went through and made historical annotations to help people understand these documents. Well, one thing that's very clear studying the life of Brigham Young is just how desperately devoted he is to Joseph Smith. And that devotion is such that Brigham will apparently only have a slight moment of doubt that it takes him a while to get into the church. You know, he's studying things in the church for a long time before he actually gets baptized. And then, as we've talked about before on this podcast, he struggles with the fact that Joseph reveals Doctrine and Covenants section 76, which says that essentially there isn't really a hell. Now, we have another listener inquiry about that. We're going to get to that in another podcast, and I think you know what that means. We're never, ever, ever going to get to it. I do have an intention to get to it.
Yeah.
If no one else emails.
You're the Travis Tritt of LDS podcasters. You always have the best of intentions.
Best of intentions. Oh, I thought you were going to say, here's a quarter, call someone who cares. But
also that.
Also that. So we'll get to that. But even with that, Brigham doesn't, what does Brigham say? He says, I didn't reject it, but I could not understand it. There's only one place of Brigham's entire life that we know that he even entertains the thought that Joseph isn't absolutely a prophet of God. And that's with the collapse of the Kirtland Safety Society. With the collapse of the Kirtland Safety Society, Brigham, this is the bank that was in Kirtland. Sorry, my voice is a little raspy. Our options were to not record it all and not give you a podcast, or you can listen to me sounding worse than I normally do. Yeah. Or we could just have Richard take it over. Richard?
Yeah, you know what? So we have
now
here...
is your time.
Yes. Well, so I think your voice is fine. Go ahead.
Good.
Ahead.
Yeah.
I would devolve quickly into things.
Well, I just assume that that this is all one massive power grab.
Yeah.
You planted a few Canadian emails, and now, anyway. But Brigham's going to say that for a brief moment after the Kirtland Safety Society fiasco happens, that Brigham thinks, is Joseph a prophet? And then immediately says, yes, he is. So he doesn't dwell on it very long. He apparently has the thought enter his head, and Brigham feels so guilty about it that the thought enters his head that he talks about it multiple times. I think he feels guilty that he ever even for a second had a thought enter his head that Joseph wasn't a prophet, even though he didn't act on it, immediately banished it from his mind, and continued to serve Joseph the remainder of his life. But Brigham still feels guilty about it, that for that one instance, the thought entered his mind. So, in many ways, Brigham Young he's the best example of the type of testimony that we want to have in the prophet Joseph Smith. Brigham Young did not decide whether or not something Joseph taught was right by comparing it to other things that had been taught. He didn't pull out his Bible and say, now, wait a minute, where does it say this, Joseph? He didn't grab his Book of Mormon and say, excuse me, Joseph, you just said that people could be saved by being baptized after this life. And, I hate to point it out to you, nowhere in the Book of Mormon. So therefore that must not be true, right? For Brigham, if Joseph said it, then it became true. If you didn't have a scripture that could back it up, it became true. If you didn't have any other revelations that preceded it or explained it afterwards, if it didn't make sense, it didn't matter. If the prophet Joseph Smith said it, it became true. So I think that's part of the reason why, I love Brigham and Joseph's relationship, and at least according to one account of Brigham Young's death, the last thing that he says as he dies is Joseph, 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 right? Brigham Young loves Joseph Smith, which, by the way, as a historian, makes you all the more angry at the ham-fisted, absolutely unacademic attempts of various apostate groups in Utah right now to put forth the absurd and frankly idiotic argument that Brigham Young had Joseph Smith killed. Brigham Young would have killed himself before he killed Joseph Smith. Brigham Young loved Joseph. And you don't have to read very much to realize how much he loved him. And Wilford Woodruff's diary, when Brigham finds out that Joseph has been murdered, and Brigham takes to his bed and bawls like a baby the whole rest of the night. Now, I'm sure that, Wilford Woodruff was also in on it, so he wrote that into his journal, pretending that, of course, Brigham didn't really order the hit. So it's one of the worst. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible argument made by people who are either deliberately attempting to deceive people because they don't have any academic resources on their side, or by people who don't know enough and therefore shouldn't be talking about it. Either way, they're terrible arguments. But Brigham loves Joseph, loves him. And so part of this story in that regard rings true even to me, right? Even though I'm not going to be able to say, aha, here's our source. So where is this source coming from? And how do we have it? How is, you've obviously heard it a couple times, Carl, like you said. Well, where have you heard it a couple times? And so we're going to try to trace back where this comes from. And in order to do that, we have to kind of unpack things. Now, it has been cited, this story has been told, and it's been quoted a couple of times in the magazines of the church. It is a story that has been cited in the Ensign in the early 2000s a couple of times, and even before that. So whenever you're trying to find where a source comes from, one of the most important things to do is to keep tracing back. So if you read an article in church newspaper and it cites a source, we'll go find that source. And then you'll see usually what you'll find is that source that's being cited is really just citing someone else. I mean, because look, I've given enough talks to know that I can't just track down the original of everything. Sometimes I'm just going to quote what someone else has already said, right? For instance, whenever I say anything about the New Testament and about how things were originally in Greek, guess who hasn't gone to the original Greek? Richard. No, me. I haven't. Although I assume Richard hasn't either.
No. I actually it's wrong of you
he
to assume
prefers
that.
more Ugaritic than the Greek.
I do, but I do comb through all of the original Greek manuscripts
yes,
on all of them.
over and over. Well, so when I say, in the original Greek, this word means this when I'm trying to make a point or answering a question for somebody, I am not an expert. I am simply citing someone who I hope is an expert. Now, that is sometimes fraught with a little bit of peril, right? Because what happens if the person that you're citing just says they're an expert? Like, for instance, what if someone you're citing says that there's evidence that Abraham Lincoln's views against slavery originated from Abraham Lincoln reading the Book of Mormon? Now, I might think that person is an expert because they say they are one, but that's why it's important to kind of track down someone's expertise. And before I quote someone as a Greek scholar on it, I'll kind of want to, if it's a big deal, I'll probably want to find another scholar that says the same thing. When we were working on the Joseph Smith papers, and I know we've already had a podcast on this, but look, it's all apocryphal all the time for us. Every day when we're doing every time we have a production meeting, which involves...
We've had zero every day.
When we have a production meeting, which involves Angie and Becky, our wives, bringing us McDonald's food and drinks while we talk about which NCAA teams we're not going to bet on this year because we don't bet.
Yeah.
But even if we did, we wouldn't.
Of course.
That's our production meeting.
While also listening to music, generally.
Yeah, we listened to Johnny Cash today.
Yeah.
Because we're going to walk the
Ring
line.
of Fire and walk the line.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, because if you don't walk the line, you're going to end up in the Ring of Fire.
That's right.
Yeah. But
Well, because and in fairness, these things have there's some complication to this, right? Like this isn't a very simple, easy thing. Like most things that you
No,
talk about, most things in history.
the reality is whenever someone presents a historical source and they make it seem like it's black and white and cut and dried, it's not. It just isn't. Almost nothing is. There's context that we don't know about. There might be multiple versions of it, all kinds of things like that, which you must not be that bored of, Carl, or you would have already stopped listening to the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Carl's a huge fan of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, of
5440 or fight?
Yeah, that's
I mean,
hilarious,
yeah.
Carl.
Now, Rex's Elders Quorum president stopped listening a few months ago.
Yes.
We need to get Rex. We need you to verify with us.
That'd be great.
Rex, we need you to reach out. It's the people cry out.
Yeah.
We need to know. So you go and you track down where that source is cited to, and then you find that other source that it's cited to. And you keep going back down the line until you can find where does the story really originate. Now, I think that this story really gets into the popular understanding of Latter-day Saints from, well, the moment you told the story in your email, Carl, Richard and I looked at each other with a very knowing glance and we said, we know that story. And we know where it's from because our hero is Truman Madsen. Now, again, we are not Truman Madsen. We are not as capable as Truman Madsen. We are certainly, collectively, the both of us, not even close to as intelligent as Truman Madsen. Okay? We're not as good at teachers. I'm sure he was a better father. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons we can.
Yeah, more handsome, better dancer, all of the things.
Yeah, I hear he was a better dancer. We're going to have Barney let us know. Barney, how did your dad dance?
No matter how he danced, he's a better dancer.
So your opinion of my dancing is so low.
Yeah, I've seen you dance.
Yeah. That was just, what, on a cruise ship?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen it.
And the worst part about trying to dance on a cruise ship is when you're a Latter-day Saint, you can't blame the fact that you're drunk. Or I guess you could to other people who don't know what a Latter-day Saint is, but to your friends who are also Latter-day Saints, unless they gave you the alcohol, you can't do it. Yeah.
I on that cruise ship I think that you're referencing, I took my wife out on the dance floor, did a couple twirls, then I went for a nice dip.
Was this before or after you sang the karaoke version of Britney Spears' "Toxic"?
I don't think it was Toxic.
Oh,
It was
what
a
was
different. It was a different Britney Spears song.
Oh, it was "Oops, I Did It Again."
Oops, I did it
Yeah,
again.
Yeah.
But
Our wives in the background are cueing us to what it was.
But
we'll post that video on our website.
I dipped my wife. My back went out, and I threw her to the ground. I fell to the ground. She went down to the ground. It was a disaster. In an attempt to be mildly romantic. That's how I know
So Barney,
that Truman Madsen was a better dancer.
We're guessing that your dad was a better dancer. But anyway, so when you told the story, I knew it instantly where it was from because it's from Truman Madsen's lectures on the prophet Joseph Smith. Now, I didn't know until you sent your email, and look, we're kind of out of my realm of history when we're doing anything that happened in the 20th century. But I didn't know that actually he had told this story earlier in a tribute to Hubie Brown. So the earliest place that you're going to hear this story written, and it's possible that someone listening, this is where they first heard it too. It's possible. Probably not though. I'm guessing that it's the Joseph Smith lectures by Truman Madsen. And so let me share that. It's a tribute to Hubie Brown, and you might be thinking, well, why in the world? I know you go on tangents, Garrett, but now you're talking about Hubie Brown in order to talk about Brigham Young being rebuked by Joseph Smith.
By the way, we'll put a link to Truman Madsen's actual talk on BYU speeches to the
which will be better
to the
than
episode.
This
so
podcast.
we recommend that you just stop now. Click on that link and just listen to his actual lecture.
Hopefully you don't even click on our link. You just listen to that
Go
and it'll be
straight to
better.
that.
Yeah. And actually, you know what? As an aside, because that's all we do is asides.
Yep. We're never going to get to your question, Carl.
Well, I mean, we kind of got to it. We said, hey, Carl, thanks for the question. You're wrong about the postmaster. Tune in for more. I love Hubie Brown. Now, obviously, I didn't know him the way that some of our listeners did because they actually got to hear him speak. I didn't, but I'll tell you what, the two greatest talks I ever heard as a young person were God is the Gardener and Profile of a Prophet. And those two talks by President Brown were a big part of my testimony. And I honestly just loved the way that he taught. I loved the way that he provided evidences and emotion and reason and humor all the way around. And so, I mean, I already love Truman Madsen. The fact that he's profiling President Brown makes me even more, happy to talk about this. But Truman Madsen was apparently on very good terms with President Brown and his family. And I think that's the reason why he wrote this tribute, which is a wonderful tribute. Okay. It's published in the 1976 April New Era magazine. Some of you can just turn around to the stacks of them.
My mother-in-law used to,
Did she have all of them?
Well, I swear that she kept everything, every magazine ever, in case you ever needed a picture or some quote. She had.
That's pretty.
I don't know
awesome.
if she had the.
That's
April
what we did before the internet.
1976.
Just so everyone knows.
But man, she kept all.
My
of those
dad did
magazines.
the same thing. He kept all the magazines, and then when he had to give a talk,
he would reference.
We go to LDS.org.
Yeah.
My dad's sitting there going through like nothing in 1983, and he's going through that. Anyway, this in this article, this is what Truman Madsen quotes from these conversations that he had from the family. So I'm going to be quoting the article here. Some of his most severe tests were, as always, in his own family and in his own church. So talking about President Brown, some of the tests that he had to go through. From his wife, Zina, he learned to treasure a family legacy. The story of Brigham Young receiving a lacing from the prophet Joseph Smith, a deliberate and public blow to the very core of the man, his pride. Brigham arose with all eyes upon him, and in a tone everyone knew was without bitterness, cried out, "Joseph, what do you want me to do?" The prophet burst into tears, descended, and embraced Brigham, saying, in effect, "You passed, Brother Brigham, you passed." President Brown knew the privileges of high office, but also those of release. He knew what it was to step up and to step down. For him, it was crucial that the saints be able to take that kind of medicine, to endure priesthood stress, even undeserved, and to plod on in sweetness of spirit in the absence of any tangible encouragement. O Lord, his family often heard him pray, if in order to be humble we must be humiliated, give us the courage to say, let it come.
Beautiful.
First of all, you can already tell reading that how much better Truman Madsen is than us. Collectively, probably everyone listening. That was beautiful. And it also goes to, the great talk that President Brown gave, God is the Gardener. The entire idea that some trials are necessary in order to make us who we are, and that it's actually the whole point of this life. We came to this earth to have trials. And that sounds terrible when I say it like that. It sounds like I wouldn't be able to sell tickets to that preaching. But
maybe to just the 2/3 of the people that you're preaching it to.
Oh boy. Wow. What a War in Heaven reference. That's pretty good.
You.
Yeah. But here you get this understanding that it's a family story that he learns from his wife. Now why does this matter? Well, that's because his wife is a granddaughter of Brigham Young. So this story of Brigham Young being chastised is apparently one that's being told inside of his in-laws' families. And it's being told enough times that apparently it is something that was powerful to President Brown and touched him enough that he's telling Truman Madsen this story, at least on one occasion, powerfully enough for Truman Madsen to remember it. So that's when it first becomes public. It's first in a public a church publication. Now, the question would immediately arise, right? So if it's in a church, meeting, it's a public, lacing from the prophet Joseph. Do we have any other sources that talk about this? I should wait till the very end to give the reveal.
Just go ahead.
Yeah.
Just
no, we don't.
I think that was.
Everyone knew that.
Yeah, you were.
Well, Carl
tipping
called
your hand
me a
bit.
dream crusher, and
Well, that's what you're about to do here.
no, I'm not going to dream crush. I'm just going to explain,
Okay.
while also
Saying that it probably maybe
no,
possibly
Well,
did.
so look, it's clearly a part of family tradition, and like I said, though, when it really gets into the Latter-day Saint lexicon is with Truman Madsen's lectures. Now, lectures, as every good historian will tell you, thankfully do not have footnotes because you're up there winging it. I mean, not that you don't know the stuff, but heavens, if I were to try to footnote everything I'm saying on this podcast, not only would it reveal how terrible I am at this, but it would be a nightmare to try to do.
That's why we don't put references. That's the main reason.
Right. We don't put references because then the emperor has no clothes. Then suddenly people will be like, wait a minute. He didn't even put the citation to which version of the Journal of Discourses article that was? Nope, he didn't. Right. So, but it's from his lectures that he gives. Well, those lectures were incredibly popular. I mean, they were so popular that, a decade and a half later, Richard and I are listening to them on our mission, and they are a hot commodity to get your hands on.
Yeah,
because they're so incredible.
I would think 50% of the missionaries in my mission had one of those tape.
And again, it's part of the reason
series.
why we say that Truman Madsen meant so much to our testimonies, because those lectures, the fact that we had access to them, were the building blocks of our understanding, at least, of Joseph Smith and our faith, our testimonies. I mean, I gained a testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith through prayer, but I gained an understanding of who Joseph was by listening to those tapes. I think that's probably a fair thing. Now, and look, set me on a career path to where it's what I did and do for a living now. Or as Carl reminds us, as I try to glut myself on filthy lucre with the premium content, which some of that's just American history.
Yeah, some of it is. I mean, about half of it. About half of the stuff.
54-40 or fight.
That's right.
We haven't got to that yet.
We have not.
We'll never get to that.
No.
We're somewhere near, though. We're approaching. We're thinking about Boston Tea Party.
Yeah, we're getting close to that. We just concluded. Just as a bit of a this free episode sponsored by the premium content, where we just spent 3 weeks talking about the Stamp Act and the aftermath of the 7 years.
Tell me
war.
that wasn't interesting.
It was.
Tell me about Andrew Oliver.
Yeah, yeah, that was actually pretty great.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with him, and so did the Tea Party Patriots. So those talks were so powerful that people essentially clamored to Truman Madsen. And again, we should probably if we have Barney on as a guest sometime, we'll ask him these questions. That his dad agreed to turn them into a book. And so he does. He publishes a book that's called Joseph Smith the Prophet.
That we just purchased. Proceeds. Hopefully he has a better deal than you've got in terms of when you publish articles or publish things.
Yeah, well, I mean, no one reads what I publish.
That's
so it
fair.
Makes no difference.
But hopefully to the estate of Truman Madsen.
To the estate. I hope this means that there's just that much more root beer from the brick oven that is available to you. When he publishes these, outside of like little editing things, he just publishes them as is, and then goes through the gargantuan task, and this is a big deal, of going in and inserting footnotes to every one of the stories and sources that he gives in those lectures. This must have taken him forever, except he was a genius, so maybe it took him like a weekend. And for me, it would be like, that'll be the next 10 years of our lives, Angie. This is going to be me looking up footnotes to put in here. Well, so let me share from the lecture, because this is, again, edited just a little bit for like, people coughing in the room. We don't include that. It doesn't like cough, cough, cough. Talking about Joseph Smith. So I'll give a little bit of a lead into it. Incidentally, the prophet, loving, playful, and cheerful though he was, did not balk when he was inspired to rebuke or to admonish with sharpness. After the rebuke, he would show forth an increase of love to the one rebuked, in accordance with Doctrine and Covenants 121:43. But he could be towering when he rebuked, and it could penetrate to the very vitals. Illustrative of this story, still carried in the family lore of Brigham Young's descendants, but, so far as I know, never recorded. And then he goes on to tell the story. So, in his talk, he very responsibly tells the listeners, hey, there isn't a document that says this. This is family tradition that says this. In fact, he uses the word lore that says it. Now, I think he feels comfortable saying that because, it was related enough times by Zina and by Hugh Brown that at least the family really felt that it was a great story of Brigham Young's character. And by the way, it is for me, if that story didn't happen, or at least didn't happen exactly the way that it came down to the family, it's still very illustrative of who Brigham Young was. Absolutely devoted to Joseph. Now, would he have taken a dressing down from, say, Orson Pratt? No, he would not. Especially when Brigham was the prophet and Orson Pratt was the one questioning him. But he's being very responsible as a scholar. I mean, listen to all the caveats in this sentence. Is a story, okay, so already a story is that's not saying, hey, let me tell you what happened. A story generally suggests this is a narrative that you got from somewhere that is still carried in the family lore, okay? I don't know how many people hear the word lore and immediately say, oh yeah, that absolutely happened. In fact, the term folklore has kind of a negative connotation in our society today. I'm not saying that it should, but it kind of does. It has a negative connotation to most people. The lore of Brigham Young's descendants, but so far as I know, it's never recorded. So he's telling you, first of all, this is a story that was just passed on through oral tradition. I can't find any source that talks about it at the time, and I can't find any other source that talks about it. But this is what the family says happened. And, then he goes on to tell the story and, uses it to prove the point. Brigham could have responded, now look, haven't you read that you're not supposed to rebuke in public, but only in private, Joseph? Which is pretty good. Or, Brother Joseph, doesn't it say something in the Revelations about persuasion and long-suffering and gentleness and meekness? or you're dead wrong. It was not so. But he said none of the above. In a voice everyone could tell was sincere, he said simply, Joseph, what do you want me to do? And the story says, now again, he keeps qualifying it over and over and over again. This is a story. I don't have a source, right? Says the prophet burst into tears, came down from the stand, threw his arms around Brigham and said, in effect, Brother Brigham, you passed. So when this was told in these talks, I mean, Truman Madsen is in the spirit of a talk. I honestly don't even know if he'd anticipated saying that, but it just kind of came to his mind. You know what? Here's a story that kind of illustrates Brigham Young's devotion to Joseph, right? Or Joseph rebuking someone and then showing love to them. So in his sources, in this book, he is going to explain exactly where he gets the story. Recounted to the author, recounted to Truman Madsen, by Elder Hugh B. Brown, whose wife, Zina, was a granddaughter of Brigham Young. So, and then also references the fact that it was in the same New Era article that he had written. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with someone teaching something like this with the number of caveats that they have in it. I mean, I do the same thing where I say, now, I don't know if this is true, but there's a chance that, or so-and-so 30 years later said, I mean, I do it all the time. Because I want my listeners to realize the difference between a really good, firsthand, primary, contemporary source and a later reminiscent account. And I think we talked about on a previous podcast how reminiscences can sometimes get out of hand. Now, that doesn't mean they always do, and it doesn't mean that there's no truth to them. But sometimes you will have people saying that they remember an event that they literally weren't born for. Now, that's not the case here, but I mean, you will have people do that. Now, that's not always malicious, but it is a fact that historians deal with.
So what about the fact that here's a public dressing down, and Joseph, there's nothing that Joseph, where he mentions it, nothing where Brigham Young mentions it, nothing where anybody who was there mentions it. What does that necessarily mean, if anything?
Well, so it does mean that a historian has to give more pause to it. Now, look, you cannot be definitive by arguing from the absence of evidence. You simply can't. I mean, Richard was telling me a story the other day that, you know, he had heard a story from someone else. So it's already, I mean, basically we're to a French postmaster at this point. Richard doesn't even deserve an acre. That he was being told a story about someone else. We're like so far removed that this is by rumor at this point.
Yeah, but it was a funny story.
Of someone who, in a position of power, in a position of authority, had very publicly given a dressing down to another member of the ward council. Had called out this person in a public way and told them what a terrible job they did and how wrong it was of them. And it was hard on the ears for other people involved, right?
Right.
Now that event, I'm assuming happened. Now it is by rumor because it's coming from you and, you know, but it's probably a lie, but, that event happened. And yet, do you think anyone wrote that down in their journal?
No.
So would that mean, because we can't find an original account of it in someone's journal, that the event never happened at all?
No, but I mean, if you were to, if we were to subpoena text records, you might find text evidence.
Maybe.
That was...
And what if we never did? What if 100 years passed and all you had was in that person's family history? Oh man, when Dad was in a bishopric, he got totally, waylaid publicly about what a terrible bishopric member he was.
Yeah. The story's about me. Yeah.
Sorry, Brady. So the point is, you can't prove definitively that an event did not happen with the absence of evidence. You simply cannot, which is part of the problem when you deal with all of these things surrounding reminiscent accounts, family histories of things that happened in the past. Because the very fact that they're family histories means they are rarely written down, and they're certainly not written down at the time. Does that mean they didn't happen? Of course not. I have all kinds of experiences that have happened in my life that I did not write down. What if someone else did?
And you have a period in Joseph Smith's life where literally almost everything is being written down, or a lot more of it is, and you have periods where it's not. And so who knows when this could have happened, or...
Yeah. I mean, you're assuming it's after Brigham Young was called, to the Quorum of the 12, but I mean, whether that's a part of the family lore or not, you wouldn't know, because it's, again, someone recounting something from the past. So it's entirely possible that it happened. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but a historian who was, say, writing an academic book on Brigham Young and his interactions with Joseph Smith, if they told that story, they would caveat it just as much as Truman Madsen did. Hey, there's a family story that has been in circulation for a while that I heard 100 years after the fact that says that. And you would caveat it like that, because that's telling your reader, hey, this is the type of source this is. You'll notice I try to do that a lot on this podcast, or actually maybe you don't notice it because I'm not doing a very good job of it. But maybe you notice that a lot of the times I will say things like, well, at least later, so-and-so said this. Now that's the cue to the audience. This is not, Joseph Smith wrote this in his journal. This is, someone later said that Joseph said that. It doesn't mean that he didn't say it, but it does mean it's a different type of source. And you'll notice there's all kinds of details we are lacking in this story. When was it? Hard to track something down when you don't know when it was. Kind of like, we know that there was no possible way that there was any Nephites living in North or South America. Because you looked literally everywhere all at once? Yes. What about the 99% of unexplored area? Well, other than that.
And 4 minutes ago, you discovered a place that you thought like 6 people lived and 30 million lived there. Like 6 minutes ago, you discovered
exactly.
that.
Yeah, exactly. The whole point is, when people want to argue from the absence of evidence, they should never be definitive about it. They should be upfront about it, which is exactly what Truman Madsen was. This story I haven't been able to find written down. I think because it was never written down. It's a family tradition. It's written down now because he told it in these lectures, and then the book was published from the lectures. The problem is, once it gets published in the book, then people are not as careful as he was when he used it. When he used it, he said, just so everyone knows, we don't have a written record of this. This is a family lore. This is a story we don't know. But when people cited it from his book, they simply said, remember the time Brigham Young had Joseph say this to him? And then cited Truman Madsen's book. Now, if someone went and looked up that footnote, they would see, oh, yeah, he's being a little hesitant with this source. In fact, it's probably the most hesitant thing he says in that entire series of lectures, where he caveats it like 7 times. But because it was personally related to him by President Brown, I think he feels, you know what, this is an important story to tell. And it really did teach the principle he was trying to teach. So I think you can talk about just about anything if you're going to tell people what it is you're using for a source, and you let them know that there are some sources that are better or worse. Now, when it comes to Brigham Young, you don't actually have to have that story to know that that Brigham is completely devoted to Joseph. And when I say completely devoted, I mean completely devoted. Brigham Young is so devoted. And I know I've told this story before, and you know what? I'm going to tell it again. And I'm going to probably tell it again and again and again because it's one of my favorite stories. And it's a relatively new story, so you probably haven't seen it very many places. But if you're looking for it, because we don't footnote, because we are not responsible, it's in the Council of 50 Minutes. The Council of 50 record that was published through the Joseph Smith Papers. If you're looking, it's called Administrative Volume 1. If you go to Deseret Book and say, I need Administrative Volume 1 of the Joseph Smith Papers, I mean,
good luck with
I don't
that.
get royalties from
Yeah,
that
no.
either. But
No.
I mean, no, you still have to glut yourself on the premium for me to be able to keep doing this. But in that, Brigham Young is going to really talk about, well, he's going to demonstrate his devotion to Joseph. Now, first of all, Brigham says something very clear in the first general conference that follows Joseph's murder. In October of 1844, this is what Brigham Young says. It is the test of our fellowship to believe and confess that Joseph lived and died a prophet of God in good standing. Now, that's one of my favorite sentences of all time. People, even in the church today, I will sometimes encounter people who say things like, well, I think, Joseph was a prophet, but, once he introduced polygamy, I think he just, he went off the rails there. Not to Brigham Young. It is the test of our fellowship to believe and confess that Joseph lived and died a prophet of God in good standing. And I don't want anyone to fellowship the 12 who says that Joseph is fallen. Brigham is drawing a pretty clear line in the sand. If you're going to say that Joseph became a fallen prophet because he taught about progression to become like God, because he taught about plural marriage, because he taught about eternal marriage, because he taught about work for the dead, because he taught about temple ordinances, I don't want you. Yeah, I'm trying to keep the church together. If you don't think that Joseph Smith was a prophet when he was shot in Carthage, then I don't want you. I don't need your fellowship. I don't want your fellowship. It's the true test of fellowship to believe and confess that Joseph lived and died as a prophet. If you don't know whose right it is to receive revelations, I will tell you. It is I. There has never been a man who stood between Joseph and the 12, and unless we apostatize, there never will be. If Hiram had lived, he would not have stood between Joseph and the 12, but he would have stood for Joseph. Did Joseph ordain him to take his place? He did. Who was it? It was Hiram, but Hiram fell a martyr before Joseph did. If Hiram had lived, he would have acted for Joseph. And then when we had gone up, the 12 would have sat down at Joseph's right hand and Hiram on the left. The Bible says God has set in the church first apostles, then comes prophets. Afterwards, because the keys and powers of the apostleship are greater than that of prophets. He's trying to teach the fact that what was Joseph ordained to by Peter, James, and John? They were ordained to be apostles. Sidney Rigdon cannot hold the keys without Joseph. If he had held the keys without Joseph and been faithful, he would have been with us. If the 12 did not apostatize, they carry the keys of this kingdom wherever they go. He concluded by requesting all the brethren to tarry with us until all this business is through. So there's Brigham in his first conference after Joseph's murdered saying, if you are going around saying Joseph made mistakes in his doctrine, just get out. I don't want you. I don't want you in the church. Now, that might come across as a little harsh. If some of you do have questions about Joseph Smith who are listening, please don't get out of the church. Also, though, if you're going to go create a website that talks about how Joseph Smith isn't a prophet, actually, you know what? Do get out of the church. There's a big difference between having questions and publicly declaring that you know the answers to those questions, especially when you don't know. So in the Council of 50 Minutes, that was in the conference. That was in the general conference. You can look that up in the Times and Seasons. It's October 15th of 1844. But in the Council of 50 Minutes, they're all sitting around talking about how horribly they've been treated by the federal government. And in that conversation, they talk about, these evils that have happened. And Alvin Babbitt interjects and says, hey, we need to be careful what we say. Because, in Missouri, there were people who were giving sermons talking about how our rights have been taken from us. And it stirred people up and it caused a problem. Well, the meeting goes on until Brigham Young stops the meeting. And he stops the meeting and addresses that very thing. He says, Elder Babbitt, when he was speaking about inflammatory speeches, was making a reference to Joseph. He says, I know that he had Joseph in his mind, and no man can ever speak against Joseph in my presence, but I shall tell him of it. Brigham Young was absolutely devoted to Joseph Smith. That's what every source we have says. He didn't move west because everyone wants to live next to a salt lake in the middle of a desert. He moved west because Joseph said they needed to move west. He didn't maintain the program of building temples at their huge cost and expense because it was a great way to bring people together in their poverty. He did it because Joseph Smith taught it and revealed it. He didn't reject the doctrine of mankind becoming like God because Joseph Smith taught it. He didn't throw out work for the dead or temple endowments because Joseph Smith taught it. As Brigham would later say, to carry out Joseph's measures is sweeter to me than the honeycomb. While Joseph was living, it seemed as though he was hurried by the Lord all the time, and especially for the last year. It seemed he laid out work for this church would last them 20 years to carry out. I used to wonder why it was that he used to be hurried so, not supposing that he was going to die. But now I understand the reason. He is certain that what their job is as a church is to follow the prophet Joseph Smith. And of course, you all know the quote where he says, I feel like shouting hallelujah all the time that I knew the prophet Joseph Smith. So while, I can't definitively discuss, this story, at least I can tell you where it comes from. It comes from Brigham Young's family descendants. And that's how it gets into the Latter-day Saint understanding. Did it happen exactly the way that the descendants have passed it down? I don't know. Could there have been some different details? Certainly there's details we don't have. In either case, I believe were Brigham Young to be rebuked by Joseph, it would not in any way have stayed Brigham Young's faith. Because Brigham Young was first and foremost a follower of Jesus through Joseph Smith. He knew about Jesus because of Joseph, and he was going to continue to know about Jesus because of Joseph. And he will credit Joseph for his testimony the remainder of his life. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll try to not answer more questions next week, which is I think what we're doing at this point, right? We tell people we'll eventually...
Next week, Apostles and Apostates, Part 2.
There's no possible way we're doing that.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Garrett Dirkmott. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.